not a park bike, it's a national park bike. And I'm loving it. My name's Guy Kestevan. I've been a professional bike and kit tester for nearly 27 years. Today, I'm out with Joe and Claire riding the drop bar rad gravel incarnation of Pace's RC429 steel all-rounder, or what they call the unicorn bike. Set up rigid forks, super wide drops, to see how well I get on with it in this more extreme mode after really loving it as a conventional trail bike. So just warming up on the little purpose-built bike path at Sutton Bank here after picking the bike up from Sutton Bank Bikes. And the good news is it doesn't feel wonky. I mean, looking at it, that really raked out fork, that extra reach, reminded me of the evil Chamois Hagar, which, if you remember that video, wasn't a happy partnership. But this, it actually falls into turns, curves its way around, just as you'd expect. And it's certainly very long for a drop bar bike. I think I'm going to be riding in the tops quite a lot, but yeah, initial impressions aren't that terrifying. And that big frigid fork, because it is a monster. Those are huge hollow legs on it. It's unlike anything I've seen, but it actually comes from the same frame vendor as Pace used for their RC295 full suspension bike. So it's a mix of 3K cross-ply and then sort of Torre pre-impregnated mix. And Adrian Carter, designer at Pace, has deliberately designed it so it's not a full-on cargo fork. So although it does have leg bosses, they're limited to 5 kilos each side in terms of loading. But that means he can make it thinner wall and more compliant. And you got masses of mud clearance on it, up to 29 by 2.8 if you want to kind of make a mullet tyre bike out of it, because the back end's not as roomy. I think it tops out at a chunky 2.3 or a slick 2.4 if you're running something like these race schemes here. And even though, you know, drop bar shifters and drop bars themselves are actually heavier than mountain bike spec, and this has got a hand-built Hope DT Swiss wheel set on it, whereas when I rode it as a trail bike I put my own Superlight Zip XC wheels in. Having this rigid fork on still represents a big weight saving. So this complete bike spec like this, again, Alloy Hope RX crank, Shimano GRX, comes in at 11.56, which from memory is just under a kilo lighter than the trail spec version of the same bike. And obviously that's pretty chunky, even compared to a conventional steel frame gravel bike. But bowling along here, just smoothly cruising along on a big tyre space at 25 psi, it just feels really eager for easy speed and a proper distance ride. All good so far. And one of the things I really liked about the 429 as a trail bike was kind of how poppy and energetic it felt. for a steel bike, and still definitely getting that in rigid form with the heavier wheels. And then the flow after you top out, really encouraging. Massages momentum along nicely. And what's funny as well is that you still get a little bit kind of suspension fork bounce and feel when you're out the saddle, through the tyre and through the fork. It doesn't feel like, you know, you're doing press-ups on concrete if you get over the front. Which bodes well for longer ride comfort. Plus you've also got the luxury of all those different hand positions to play with, you know, which is the whole point of riding drop bars rather than flats. So obviously, you know, you could ride flats, cow-horns, loop back bars, whatever you want, because it does feel pretty stretched when you're out on the hoods. Naturally feels more comfortable when my hands are back there, but then it's a 480mm wide bar, so still plenty of space for navigating. Nice bit of rolling single track. You don't feel pinched in when it comes to leverage and control. And then when it starts tipping downwards, there's a proper flair to them. And also they're very shallow drops, so it's just a really nice secure hand position. It doesn't feel like you're gonna bounce off. I have to say that, and it's 66.5 degree head angle in this spec, because the fork basically mimics the geometry of a sagged 120mm fork, so something like a SID or a 34. Just feels right. How does it go, Joe?
What?
Sit on my pace and tell me that you love me. Sit on my pace and tell me that you do. Wasn't that your phrase originally? No. Well, that would killed it.
Sit on my face and tell me that you love me.
Yeah, I know that.
A friend suggested it, and you're like, you'll never get away with that. Thanks for the money, mate.
How icons are born.
It's all someone else's idea.
Yep. Thieves and plagiarists long before AI.
Artists steal, geniuses plagiarise.
All very deep. Complete with Cuckoo soundtrack a minute ago as well. But look, I'm currently demonstrating how well this bike rides on single track one-handed, because of all that stability, or something like that. And if you buy the forks with the frame, they're colour coded to match any of the three colours. Oh, hang on.
They don't match at all, it's the wrong green. It's a completely different tonal value.
Artists. Bloody artists. Better have a word with Adrian. And if you watch the SP140 video, you'll realise this is actually one of the transition descent sections, this bridleway. So interesting to compare this rad gravel bike with a progressive modern trail bike down here. And I can tell you there are points, particularly under braking, where things get a lot sketchier just because the amount of jolt coming through the fork. But actually the geometry is really, really impressive, and compared to other bikes I've ridden in this category, despite it being really fat, that fork is super forgiving. I guess if you want a a comparison to a conventional gravel bike, and how comfortable that feels down there compared to this bike, then yeah, you probably just about make out Claire and then Joe coming down there. I mean, all right, prior knowledge, fair play, but this thing shifts. Oh, and that's something else I've got to talk about. This little DT Swiss D2321 inverted dropper post there, which I think is going to come in really handy on the next section. And it's quite interesting, and if you look at the 650B tyres that Claire's running up front, those WTB on wider rims, probably a similar width really, but if you've got 29er wheels on this 429, you've also got a shallower angle of attack, as well as that extra volume, which smooths out the ride even more. And it done half bowl a lot. Yeah. Oh, it's making me make YouTuber noises on a gravel bike. It looks like an absolute freak in the flesh and on paper. But you know, I was chatting to Adrian a bit ago and Sophie from Pace, and they were like, should we make a dedicated like gravel adventure bike? And I was like, do you know what, I reckon you should just try and design something that works for both. You know, put all the bosses on, put all the, you know, it's even got like dynamo ports and everything. So put all that on, but also give it proper trail geometry. Because I couldn't see why not. I mean, most brands seem to sort of go, oh, but I'm not sure, you know, because I do it a bit MTB, but not fully MTB. And that kind of misses the point really, because this bike proves that you can go full trail numbers and still have a bike that doesn't feel too much like a wonky donkey on the road or simpler trails. It just feels super stable and easy to ride. You know, I'm not going to say you can go crit racing on it, but then again, you know, road bikes are moving towards shorter stems, longer frames quietly anyway, but this is a proper little rapid single tracker. Loving it. In the canals of the North York Moors. Whoa. Hey, it'll even get sandy if you let it. And this is the kind of section where that dropper post and mountain bike tyres really come in handy. Because obviously, you know, the amount of traction versus rolling speed does depend entirely on your tyre choice, but you know, these I've deliberately picked for speed because they're not much faster. That's right, there's not much faster than a Conti Race King. It's basically a road slick. I think I've seen testing figures on those rolling drum labs where they actually come out faster than some road bike tyres, let alone gravel tyres. So, you know, that's how to make the bike really quick and efficient. But you could run, you know, the same tyres you run on trail if you wanted. And Pace produce complete bikes in various specs, but they'll also do frame and fork or rolling chassis, or just help you build up a complete custom bike of your own. So loads of options, especially when you remember this bike is a proper cross-country ride with a 140mm fork. By gosh, I am loving it way more than I expected in drop bar silly mode. And while that 76.5 degree seat angle with this fork in. Might be a bit steep for some pedalers. It's actually really good for balance when you're coming up steeper climbs like this. Looking for people who might not have enjoyed that descent quite as much as you did. Hiya!
Rides up. You right, lads? Ooh, that's exciting.
Good, isn't it?
Haven't quite got my eye in.
Nearly had your eye out.
Yeah, my jab's eye out.
And on the road, this is where that tyre choice really comes into play in terms of easy rolling. And also, even though these are really wide bars, there's still a lot more aerodynamic in the hoods or on the tops on drop bars than you would be on a flat or riser bar. One real bonus is it's ace to ride no-handed because it's so stable. Normally a proper wobbler, but when you're doing your big distances or you're racing, or get your jacket off, no drama. Probably make sandwiches as you're going along on this bike. The other nice thing, that steel compliance and flow, you know, it is a cliche, but when it's done this well, it is a thing that saves your tyres when you're abseiling down a rocky descent like we did back there. Also gives a really nice buoyancy and flow just when you're tapping out tempo on the road or on gravel tracks. Very mellow. So, while it is definitely, you know, heavier even than a steel gravel bike in basic spec, it's surprisingly efficient at gaining altitude for a big bike. And I guess I'm used to it, but I'm not even struggling with the handling either, because it's just nicely balanced. You know, none of the flop and wobble that you tend to get with super slack head angles. And I've been trying to work out what this bike really reminds me of. The way it leans into the corner with such a sort of solid, totally trusting, lovely weighted feel. And it's my dog, it's our Greek trailhound, Peaky. It's the way he leans into your leg. It's like that proper, I love you. I love going round corners, me. It's that. It's exactly that vibe, but in a bike. Which sounds totally weird, but if you get a chance to demo this bike, I reckon you'll totally realise what I mean by that. And even with a 2.2 tyre in, it has a really good kind of mountain mayhem, lumpy grass nightmare. And if you dig 24-hour races around Birmingham in the 90s, you'll know what I mean by that. But it really kind of steamrollers along over that really nicely. I mean, obviously you get some thumps through, especially as it's got that dropper post on rather than a more compliant conventional post. You know, and it's not a suspension fork up front. There is more coming through your wrists and your rear, but grand scheme of things, this is a really smooth way to bowl across mixed terrain. Only occasionally you get a proper jolt or jar through on this stuff, and even then it's much less than it's going to be on a 40mm tyre. And it loves this kind of stuff. Proper drop bar zoomies on this 429. There's that extra compliance and handling confidence to push it on through the rocky sections. It's not a park bike, it's a national park bike. And I'm loving it!
Right on the edge of the moors. Right on the edge
Of the gravel bike, mountain bike,
plateau.
it's not a park bike, it's a national park bike. And I am loving it! Right, it's far too pretty not to do a quick spec check and detail check on the bike here, overlooking Lake Gormire. So obviously Pace's own bespoke 429 fork, like I say, layup very closely related to the work they did on the 295. So even though it's massive in terms of volume, and you've got these little sharp shoulders on it here, it actually feels impressively compliant. And then you've got the 3 little cargo points on it there, and then bolt 3 axles at the bottom as well. It's post mount for the fork, and you've got dynamo and brake holes on it. Otherwise all the control routing is external down the frame, apart from the dropper which just pops in there on the seat post, and then more dynamo routing there and there. We're going to be honest, the check fork welding there isn't the neatest I've ever seen, but you know, the bike rides really nicely. And then coming down to the back here, you've got a UDH hanger on here. So if you're going the SRAM route, obviously this is a Hope Shimano build, but if you're going the SRAM route, you could go full mullet with the latest T-type. There's a decent amount of mud clearance on the back there. Got mudguard and rack eyes as well. So it genuinely is fully ready as an explorer adventurer bike. Again, fuel tank mounts there, bottle cage mounts there, more under the belly. But also, as you've seen before, well, if you might not have watched that video yet. If you haven't watched the trail bike video, go back and watch that. But and then you've got little pieces like this short stroke 60mm dropper post on there as well, which Adrian, I don't think Adrian, I'm quite sure about, and I know Sophie's not because she likes an adjustable dropper, but I think it actually works really well on this bike. But then I quite like the binary feel of a Transfer SL as well. Maybe it's a racer thing. And then these really broad but compact drop super flared bars up front with a little Pro mountain bike stem, and then those big GRX levers for shifting on this side, and then dropper post actuation on that side. And to be honest, that's about the only thing I haven't gelled with straight away. I keep accidentally dropping the post rather than shifting gears, but yeah, I've only been riding it for a couple of hours, and presumably that's something I don't know, probably says more about me than the bike. It's something you will get used to, obviously, if you're riding the bike for longer. So definitely not a criticism. And the fact, you know, that's a mountain bike saddle, that's not an extra comfy gravel saddle or anything like that, but it's been totally fine, even thumping along some relatively rough trails for gravel. But then with that extra tyre volume and those big MTB wheels, I've just been happy trails all morning, I have to say. But anyway, back for the final bit of single track along the top edge and into Sutton Bank bikes, where you would be able to demo this bike by prior arrangement if you got in touch with them, because that's one of the 2 shops that Pace operate up here on the North York Moors. That's one thing I should have said, actually. If you want to know where I'm riding, this route is basically a slightly extended version of the Paradise Trail out at Sutton Bank. Just once you get to the bottom of the red descent, flick it onto Kepwick and up the road climb. It's actually a really fun illustration of just how capable and versatile this bike is, even in, this is the most extreme version really. This rigid fork, mini dropper spec. All right, theoretically, well, no, it is definitely the least capable of all the 429 builds you could go for. I think sweet spot is probably around a 120mm fork, and possibly similar wheels and tyre spec to this, as a kind of down country all-rounder if you're going for a single build, but being able to configure it so many different ways, and it still be a really fun bike at both extremes. Do a really good job of ticking a lot of different boxes, from kind of putting the grrr into gravel to being a proper single track happy progressive geometry trail bike. Genuinely does the lot, and I'm proper surprised by that, because I did think this build would be pushing it, because as I say, I've not gelled with this kind of build on bikes that look very similar on paper, but just haven't lived up to their promise on the trail. This is the way you can properly rely on that front tyre to do its thing. Yeah, it's got that genuinely centered modern mountain bike geometry. Weight balanced, heels down, tip and flow in, and then just a little bit of pop and play out of corners to encourage you to hustle it, not be a hostage to this build, but really have fun with it. You. So what better kind of bike testing fairy story is there than doing the Paradise Trail on what someone describes as their unicorn bike? But I have to say, I was sceptical of the RC429 in this spec, especially just given the size of that rigid fork. I mean, that's a proper monster piece, but it just goes to show, if you do carbon right, it's the construction, not the looks of it, that really matters. And as kind of juxtaposed as they look aesthetically, they actually ride beautifully together. And I've been, yeah, properly blown away by the bike in this spec as well. And seriously considering, you know, badgering Adrian and Sophie to take this on as a long-termer, probably as a replacement for my much-loved and missed Specialized chisel, because putting drop bar on that was going to be my next move. And to be fair, I don't even need that all-rounder versatility that this bike brings. I'm in the lucky position of being able to choose a bunch of bikes to suit different mission profiles. So being able to have all that in one bike not only gives you great sort of carte blanche in terms of where you want to ride it, but also means it's excellent value as well. So massive thanks to Pace for going to the trouble of respecing the bike and letting me borrow it again. Huge thanks to my industry supporters, whose names will be up at the end of this video. If you could support them in the way they support me when you're doing some bike bit shopping, that would be much appreciated. And huge thanks, as always, to my Patreon subscribers who pledge on a monthly basis to support the channel, and they get exclusive, early and extended edits ad-free as a thank you. So if you really like what I'm doing on Guykes TV, then please consider joining me on Patreon, and the link will be in the comments below. But, I'm really, really interested whether a bike like this appeals to you. I had a lot of kind of comments on Instagram and on the RC429 Trail video. So if you've not watched that and you want to see what this bike rides like as a more conventional mountain bike, make sure you watch that. But I'd just be really interested in what you think about this, real blender of a bike. Do you think it's a freak? Do you think it's something worthwhile? Would you even consider it, or do you think we should burn it with fire? Because, no doubt for some people it looks like it's hit every branch on the ugly tree as it's fallen out of it. But I don't know. Yeah, it definitely looks a bit weird, but the ride is remarkably sort of cultured and holistically correct, to use fancy words like that. Just rides great, and I've had an absolute ball on it. So all I've got to do to ask you now is please click for notifications, click for subscriptions, give this a thumbs up like, and if you think your mates will like watching an old fool
gooning around on all sorts of different bikes, on all sorts of different trails, then tell them to give the channel a follow as well. But for now, I've been Guy Kesteven on Guy Kest TV with Joe and Claire. So to thank them for their company as well. It's been great seeing them again up north, riding the Pace RC429 Rad Gravel Edition.